cold millionaire shows off Mistress, while signing divorce papers, but pregnant wife's next move destroys him. Ethan Lancaster was a man who seemed to have it all: immense wealth, a bevy of high-profile business connections, and a sprawling estate nestled in the rolling hills of Greenwich, Connecticut. Yet behind the lavish galas and glowing magazine covers lay a storm of betrayal, greed, and hidden agendas. On the very day he was to sign his divorce papers, Ethan arrived at the courthouse with his glamorous new mistress clinging to his arm, daring the world to gossip. Little did he know, his pregnant wife, Grace, had a breathtaking final move that would leave him reeling. What followed was a spectacle of lies, revenge, and redemption no one saw coming. From an outsider's perspective, Ethan Lancaster lived in a picture-perfect world. As the CEO of Lancaster Capital, one of the most respected private equity firms in New York, he had been honored by Forbes and lauded for his seemingly Midas touch. He graced the covers of business magazines and charitable gala programs, seemingly fueled by an endless ambition that dazzled investors and captured the attention of society's elite. His marriage to Grace Lancaster, née Shepherd, was yet another feather in his cap. Grace came from old money, an heiress to the Shepherd Pharmaceuticals fortune. Her father, Ronald Shepherd, was renowned for philanthropic work, particularly in medical research. Growing up in Boston, Grace had nurtured dreams of becoming a doctor. However, family obligations and her father's illness nudged her to take on a more direct role in the company's philanthropic endeavors. By her early 20s, she was already recognized for her charitable contributions across the globe. When Grace and Ethan crossed paths at a charity ball hosted by the Red Cross in Manhattan, it was seen as a storybook encounter. Their photographs soon filled tabloids, painting them as the golden couple. He was the self-made millionaire, forging alliances in the cutthroat realm of finance. She was the philanthropic darling, turning her family's wealth into a vehicle for compassion. Their courtship sped by in a whirlwind of black tie events, weekend getaways to the Hamptons, and starry-eyed dinners that had onlookers swooning. Within a year, they were married on the sprawling lawn of the Shepherd family estate in Newport, Rhode Island, a ceremony that local newspapers described as the wedding of the decade. Behind the meticulous veneer of white roses and haute couture, the seeds of discord were quietly growing. In many ways, their marriage served more as a business merger than a romantic partnership. Grace's father arranged subtle business dealings with Ethan's firm, ensuring that Lancaster Capital had steady infusions of capital. While the press and society pages framed it as a grand love affair, a few close insiders whispered that their union was fueled by mutual convenience. Ethan was keen on building a financial empire, and Grace's philanthropic pursuits required a partner who could smoothly handle the business side of her sizable inheritance. Despite these hushed rumors, for a time everything seemed harmonious. The couple radiated glamour at social events, raising millions of dollars for various causes. Their immaculate photos suggested they might be the new generation of philanthropic power couples. Yet, as often happens behind gilded gates, cracks in their relationship's foundation began to show. In private, Ethan's controlling behavior turned the relationship sour. He expected Grace to follow a set plan, attend certain events, maintain a particular circle of friends, manage her image on social media so he could expand his networks. Gradually, her responsibilities at Shepherd Pharmaceuticals conflicted with Ethan's desire for more social clout. Tensions rose, conversations became arguments, and fleeting romantic moments grew fewer by the day. Friends and family observed these changes. Grace's mother, Lydia, gently probed her daughter about the marriage's integrity, but Grace, respectful of her father's wishes, remained guarded. She had once cherished the dream of a genuine partnership, but now found herself entangled in a high-stakes marriage. She wasn't sure she wanted to salvage. As Ethan's star continued to rise, Grace drifted into the background, overshadowed by his successes and overshadowed by the very philanthropic work she once found fulfilling. Ethan's ambition manifested in longer work hours, extended business trips, and after parties at exclusive clubs in Manhattan. Her philanthropic endeavors, though as heartfelt as ever, couldn't compete with his relentless quest for more wealth and influence. The couple became almost like colleagues sharing a mansion, rather than two people in love. Yet every so often they remembered to play the part. Before the cameras, they held hands, laughed together, and spun romantic narratives that society lapped up. But behind these forced smiles was a fracturing marriage built more on strategic alignment than shared dreams. Though Grace tried to maintain her gentle, supportive demeanor, she started feeling suffocated by Ethan's controlling nature and thirsty for an identity beyond the wife of Ethan Lancaster. In the hush of midnight conversations with her closest confidant, her cousin Jenna Morgan, Grace would pour out her concerns. "He hardly listens anymore. We used to talk about building a better world. Now he's obsessed with expansions and buyouts." Jenna listened with empathy, but was powerless to change the dynamic. "Maybe a romantic trip somewhere? Or couples therapy?" she offered hopefully. But Grace knew these suggestions would fall on deaf ears. Ethan saw such ideas as trivial, even foolish, in the face of his business ambitions. With each passing month, the gap between them widened. Ethan chased success, forgetting the love that once made their union special, while Grace felt increasingly alone in a fortress of wealth. Those close to them could sense the marriage was on shaky ground, but nobody anticipated the dramatic turn of events that would soon explode into the tabloids, shattering their public image and leaving both sides scrambling for damage control. This, after all, was only the calm before the storm. Ethan's obsessive pursuit of wealth and connections led him to endless networking opportunities. In this world, acquaintances came and went faster than fleeting champagne toasts. It was in these glittering circles that he crossed paths with Charlotte McGill, a striking public relations executive known for her knack for spinning stories for high-profile clients. Many described Charlotte as a deadly combination of intelligence and ambition, coupled with a face that could launch the next revolution in beauty campaigns. They met at a private dinner in the penthouse suite of the Plaza Hotel, an event organized by mutual business associates. While swirling her glass of Cabernet, Charlotte locked eyes with Ethan from across the room. He recognized her instantly from a magazine piece highlighting her work with politicians in Washington, D.C. They began talking shop about everything from corporate brand makeovers to philanthropic press strategies. Their conversation flowed with surprising ease, and by the end of the evening they had exchanged personal contact details under the guise of future collaborations. At first, their relationship did revolve around business. Charlotte pitched ideas to help Lancaster Capital revamp its corporate social responsibility profile, a concept that piqued Grace's philanthropic interest. But Grace, preoccupied with her father's ailing health and her own roles at Shepherd Pharmaceuticals, was too distracted to engage deeply in these new PR strategies. Ethan found Charlotte's company electrifying. Not only was she a master of perception, but she also understood his hunger for power, feeding it with her own cunning approach to publicity. In countless late-night phone calls, supposedly about upcoming press releases, Ethan and Charlotte discovered a heady mutual attraction. Charlotte, who thrived on power plays and social conquests, saw an opportunity to anchor herself to a man who was going places fast. Ethan, bored of the polite facade he was expected to maintain with Grace, found Charlotte's brazen charm and willingness to take risks irresistible. Before long, the boundary between work and pleasure blurred. Their calls became more personal, peppered with flirtatious banter. They started meeting for discreet dinners in dimly lit restaurants, away from the paparazzi's usual hotspots. Under the cover of business trips, they rendezvoused in boutique hotels in Miami or Aspen, always careful at least initially to hide from public scrutiny. Ethan justified his infidelity by telling himself that Grace was absent in his life, too wrapped up in her father's healthcare crisis and philanthropic duties. For her part, Charlotte luxuriated in the idea of dethroning the perfect Miss S. Lancaster, a woman she secretly resented for her pedigree and squeaky clean image. Each step down this slippery path only made Ethan and Charlotte's affair more intoxicating. Rumors began to swirl in social circles. Grace, meanwhile, was consumed with worry over Ronald Shepard, whose health was failing after complicated heart surgery. She also had a gnawing sense of being sidelined in her own marriage. Although she heard the rumors friends would mention seeing Ethan in exclusive clubs at suspicious hours, she had no concrete proof. Torn by love, confusion, and her father's suffering, she chose to give Ethan the benefit of the doubt. But even the best-kept secrets can't stay hidden forever. An indiscreet moment at a charity fundraiser saw Ethan and Charlotte locked in an uncomfortably close dance, captured by the roving lens of a freelance photographer. The photo never made it to the tabloids directly. Instead, it landed in the gossip inboxes of several socialites, including Jenna Morgan, Grace's cousin. Concerned, Jenna approached Grace. "I don't want to cause unnecessary drama, but have you seen this?" Grace looked at the picture, her heart dropping to her stomach. It was ambiguous, just a dance, a private conversation, and an intimate gaze that could be interpreted as businesslike. Yet the undertones were impossible to ignore. Ethan's hand rested low on Charlotte's waist, and her eyes sparkled with the kind of mischief that goes well beyond professional rapport. Still clinging to hope, Grace brushed it off. She refused to believe her husband would stoop to such betrayal while she was dealing with so many responsibilities. But deep down, her trust was eroding. The tension at home rose to suffocating levels, with Ethan increasingly absent or busy whenever she reached out. What nobody anticipated was just how brazen Ethan would become once he felt untouchable in his clandestine relationship. In the most unforeseen turn of events, it wouldn't be Grace discovering the damning truth by chance. It would be Ethan who, in a spectacular display of pride, decided to flaunt Charlotte right in front of everyone on one of the most significant days of his life. At this juncture, not even Charlotte anticipated that the next moves would involve scandal, secret pregnancies, and a chessboard of betrayals. For as cunning as she was, she didn't factor in Grace's unyielding spirit and the depth of her familial roots, which were about to become her most potent weapon in an epic showdown nobody saw coming. Amid the mounting tension in her marriage, Grace received news that simultaneously filled her with joy and apprehension. She was pregnant. The discovery came during a routine checkup, initially intended for stress-related symptoms she had been experiencing. Dr. Alicia Martins, a longtime friend of the family, looked at the lab results and smiled. "Grace," she said, her voice trembling with genuine excitement, "you're going to have a baby." At 29, Grace had often dreamed of starting a family, envisioning quiet Sunday mornings with a toddler running around the gardens of their Greenwich estate. And while she imagined children would solidify her already precarious marriage, the timing could not have been worse. She had just buried her father, Ronald Shepard, in a solemn ceremony in Boston. Meanwhile, rumors of Ethan's affair were swirling more fiercely than ever, though he adamantly denied them whenever she confronted him. Nevertheless, Grace clung to hope. Perhaps a baby would shift the dynamic, remind Ethan of his vows, and anchor them in a renewed sense of love and responsibility. In a nervous attempt to share the news, she waited until a Sunday evening when Ethan was finally at home, though he spent most of the day locked in his study, immersed in paperwork for a looming corporate deal. She found him in the drawing room, glancing over spreadsheets and sipping bourbon, an untouched dinner growing cold on the table. "Ethan," she began softly, her hands shaking. "I have something important to tell you." He barely looked up from his laptop. "Can this wait, Grace? I've got a big meeting in the morning." Swallowing her apprehension, she forced a gentle smile. "No, it can't wait," she said, her voice cracking slightly. "I'm pregnant." For a heartbeat, there was silence. Ethan's eyes darted from the laptop screen to meet hers. She braced herself, hoping for a glimmer of the excitement or tenderness she would have expected from her husband. Instead, his expression was a confusing mix of surprise, worry, and something else, something unrecognizable that looked suspiciously like dread. "That's big news," he finally managed, reaching for his bourbon as though it were a life raft. "Wow. Congratulations, I guess." Grace's heart sank. "We should talk about this," she persisted, tears pricking at the corners of her eyes. "We need to figure out how to move forward, together." Ethan sighed deeply and closed his laptop with deliberate care. His voice, calm yet distant, felt chilling. "Look, Grace, this is a lot to process right now. My schedule is insane, and we still have," he paused, swallowing hard, "other things to settle in our marriage." She felt her throat tighten. "Are you even happy about this?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We've both talked about wanting children someday." He exhaled, running a hand through his impeccably styled hair. "Yes, of course. I'm happy," he said, but the forced tone was impossible to miss. "But we need to be realistic. There's a lot going on at Lancaster Capital, and I'm traveling more than ever. It's just bad timing." Tears threatened to escape, but Grace bit her lip. "Bad timing? This is our child, Ethan." He nodded, avoiding her eyes. "I need some time to think," he said, rising from his seat. "We'll talk more in the morning, okay?" Before she could protest, Ethan left the room. The sound of his footsteps faded up the grand staircase, leaving Grace alone in the cavernous drawing room, the echo of her shattered hopes bouncing off the marble floors. That night, she wrestled with conflicting emotions. Joy at the miracle growing inside her, and a profound sadness that Ethan was ambivalent at best, apathetic at worst. The life she had envisioned, a strong family unit and a supportive spouse, seemed to be slipping through her fingers. In the following days, Ethan avoided bringing up the pregnancy altogether. His cold attitude and evasive maneuvers spoke volumes. Grace discovered he left for a business trip to Miami with only a last-minute note, "Urgent deal to close. Back in a week. Let's talk then." She couldn't help but suspect that Charlotte had tagged along, though no official mention was made. Soon enough, Grace's illusions were fully dispelled. She received a call from a private investigator hired by Jenna Morgan, without Grace's knowledge, who confirmed Ethan's whereabouts. He wasn't in Miami merely for business. He was seen dining intimately with Charlotte. Grace's anguish transformed into a storm of emotions. Feeling betrayed, she was compelled to do what she had previously considered impossible: stand up to Ethan in a way that threatened to sever their marriage. Rage and heartbreak spurred her into action. By the time Ethan returned, Grace was waiting in the living room with evidence laid out like a criminal case. File, photos, credit card receipts, text messages forwarded by Jenna's hired detective. Ethan walked in, loosening his tie as if he was stepping into a serene homecoming, only to freeze under Grace's accusatory stare. "What the hell is this, Grace?" he demanded, eyes flitting across the table, strewn with incriminating documents. "You tell me," she replied in a low, trembling voice. "These receipts from the Fontainebleau in Miami? The photos of you two leaving that restaurant at midnight? You've been lying to me, Ethan." Lying to your pregnant wife. He said nothing at first, momentarily speechless. Then his face hardened, that trademark Lancaster pride kicking in. "You've been spying on me?" he growled. "That's an invasion of privacy." Grace's mouth set into a grim line. "Don't you dare turn this around on me," she hissed. "You've betrayed your vows, and you're still lying about it." He slammed his briefcase onto the floor. "Fine. Yes, Charlotte and I are together. And you know what? We're happy. We have real chemistry, something you and I lost a long time ago." The words struck like a slap. "Get out," Grace managed to whisper, her voice laced with agony and fury. "I don't want you in this house tonight. Pack your things and leave." Ethan stared at her, disbelief mingling with rising anger. "You can't be serious," he said, eyes narrowing. "This is my house too, remember. And let's not forget the money from your father's estate that's tied up with Lancaster Capital. Are you sure you want to do this?" Grace's heart pounded, but she refused to waver. She pointed to the door. "Yes, leave." He grabbed his briefcase with a sharp motion and stomped out, slamming the door so hard that the crystal sconces on the wall rattled. Grace sank into a chair, tears flowing freely now, yet intertwined with a growing sense of resolve. She gently cradled her abdomen, murmuring, "We'll be okay," to the unborn life within her. In that moment, Grace realized her future and that of her child might no longer include the man she once believed was her soulmate. But neither she nor Ethan could have foreseen how far their battle would escalate, or how swiftly their marriage would unravel in the public eye. A week passed, and during that time, Ethan didn't return to the estate. Instead, he and Charlotte were spotted at a swanky midtown penthouse that tabloids soon identified as Charlotte's new residence courtesy of Ethan's wallet. The scandal lit up social media and high society gossip circles. Everyone was talking. The elusive Ethan Lancaster, always so careful about his image, was now flaunting his mistress in full view. Despite the heartbreak, Grace maintained a stoic front. She had to. The press was hounding her for a statement, and her family's philanthropic foundation was under scrutiny. She sought advice from her legal team, including her father's longtime attorney, James Whitmore, a man renowned for his expertise in corporate law and estate planning. While James had never handled a divorce for Grace specifically, his counsel on sensitive family matters was invaluable. She sat in James's office, the high-rise windows overlooking Central Park. The tension in the room was palpable as he reviewed documents. "Grace," he began gently, "we need to consider how this affects not just your personal life, but also Shepherd Pharmaceuticals and your father's estate. Do you have any inkling how Ethan might try to leverage your finances during a divorce?" Grace nodded, her eyes heavy with worry. "He's threatened to fight for everything. I suspect he'll argue that much of my inheritance was invested in Lancaster Capital. He may demand partial or even full control of the funds, claiming they were part of the firm's growth." James set his jaw. "He'll have a tough time with that argument if we can prove the funds were meant solely as a partnership for philanthropic ventures, or if they remained in your separate name. But I won't lie, it could get messy." As if on cue, Grace's phone buzzed. A text from Jenna flashed on the screen. "Ethan's at the courthouse with Charlotte. Something about divorce papers." Heart pounding, Grace muttered a hurried goodbye to James. She had expected Ethan to take legal steps, but not so publicly and definitely not so brazenly. She hailed a taxi and rushed to the courthouse. Reporters swarmed outside like vultures, cameras flashing, microphones brandished. She slid out of the taxi and pushed through the crowd, ignoring the cacophony of shouted questions. "Is it true you're pregnant?" "Grace, any comment on the affair? How will this affect your father's company?" Inside, the marble floors and echoing halls offered a stark contrast to the chaos outside. She spotted Ethan, impeccably dressed in a tailored navy suit, standing near the clerk's office with Charlotte at his side. Charlotte was dressed in an eye-catching red pencil dress and high heels, her arm delicately draped through Ethan's. A smug grin curved her lips as she surveyed the spectacle. It was a brazen display, a direct statement to the world that they were together, no apologies, no remorse. "What are you doing?" Grace demanded, her voice trembling with both anger and hurt. Ethan shrugged. "Filing the divorce papers. I didn't see the need to wait." He glanced at Charlotte, who looked at Grace with thinly veiled triumph. "Charlotte's just here for support." Grace's gaze flickered to her husband's new partner, her nails dug into her palms, and for a split second the entire scenario felt surreal, as though she was trapped in someone else's nightmare. "In front of the press? You're turning this into a circus," she managed to say, her voice quivering. Ethan's eyes sparkled with a cold superiority. "Let them watch. They've been salivating for something like this. Better to feed them the narrative we choose than to let them keep guessing." At that moment, Grace felt her entire life unraveling. The man she once adored was parading his mistress in her face, unashamed and unapologetic, while ending their marriage with a flourish of spectacle. She clutched her purse, trying to steady her breathing. There was no way she would sign these papers without a fight. Suddenly, Charlotte stepped forward, her tone dripping with condescension. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way, Grace, but sometimes relationships just run their course." The calculated slight stung. Grace inhaled sharply, regaining her composure. She took a step back and eyed them both, particularly Ethan. "Is this truly what you want?" Ethan's expression faltered for a brief second, revealing a flicker of uncertainty, but he quickly masked it with icy resolve. "Yes," he said flatly. "This marriage is over." Grace nodded, determination coalescing in her chest like molten steel. "Fine. Have your divorce, Ethan. But don't think for 1 second that you'll walk away from this unscathed." She spun on her heel and walked out, ignoring Charlotte's self-satisfied smirk. As she exited, the paparazzi pounced, capturing images of her tear-stained face and trembling hands. She said nothing, offering no comment, desperate to flee the building. Back in James Whitmore's office, Grace recounted the humiliating episode, tears flowing freely this time. James listened intently, then responded in a somber tone. "There's more at stake than your heartbreak, Grace. Ethan is connected to major players in finance and politics. If we're going to protect your inheritance and your child's future, we'll need a robust strategy." Grace wiped her tears, face set in resolve. "What do I do next?" He offered her a reassuring smile. "We assemble a formidable legal team. We research every bit of paperwork that ties Shepherd money to Lancaster Capital. And we prepare for the worst, because Ethan will likely use every resource he has to come out ahead." But behind Grace's resolute demeanor, something was stirring, an idea, or perhaps a hidden card. Over the years, Ronald Shepherd had amassed not just wealth, but also an intricate network of powerful allies and confidential documents. Grace, though never one to delve into politics or corporate espionage, suspected that somewhere in her father's files lay a weapon that could turn the tide in her favor. She couldn't articulate it yet, but she felt it in her bones, the final, devastating blow to Ethan. Lancaster's arrogant bravado was within her reach, and for the sake of her unborn child, she would not hesitate to use it. In the aftermath of that courthouse spectacle, Grace found herself ensnared in legal wrangling and emotional turmoil. But she was far from defenseless. Armed with the unwavering support of Jenna Morgan and James Whitmore, Grace began to systematically examine her late father's documents. Ronald Shepherd had been meticulous, retaining detailed records of every investment, partnership, and philanthropic endeavor. After countless evenings hunched over dusty file boxes, Grace stumbled upon a series of documents that would reshape her understanding of the financial arrangement between Shepherd Pharmaceuticals and Lancaster Capital. Dated several years earlier, shortly after her wedding, these documents revealed that Ronald, perhaps wary of Ethan's ambition, had added a clause to their business agreement. This clause specified that any capital invested in Lancaster Capital by Shepherd Pharmaceuticals remained under the controlling interest of the Shepherd family if certain conditions were met, including a severe breach of trust within the marriage. Breath trembling, Grace carefully read the legalese. In simplest terms, if Ethan breached marital loyalty or compromised the intent and integrity of the partnership, the funds and any profits yielded were subject to full reclamation by the Shepherd family. To enforce the clause, Grace would need concrete proof of Ethan's misconduct. Ironically, Ethan's public flaunting of Charlotte seemed to fit the bill perfectly. She immediately shared the revelation with James and Jenna. James, ever the calm strategist, looked over the documents with an impressed but measured gaze. "This is extraordinary," he said, nodding. "Your father was always a step ahead. The question now is, can we enforce this in court?" Grace's voice wavered with a mix of excitement and trepidation. "You tell me. Ethan's affair is no secret anymore. Does that qualify as a breach significant enough to activate this clause?" James set the papers down, temple creased in concentration. "Absolutely. If the court recognizes the affair as damaging to the integrity of the partnership, especially given the public scandal, then these funds could be reclaimed. But Ethan will fight this tooth and nail. This is half his empire we're talking about." Jenna, who had been hovering anxiously, leaned forward. "Grace, this is your golden bullet. You have the moral high ground and the legal advantage. But using this will spark an all-out war with Ethan." Grace steeled her nerves. "He started this war the moment he humiliated me at the courthouse. And let's not forget, I'm pregnant. I refuse to let him walk away with my family's inheritance and leave me and our child vulnerable." Meanwhile, unknown to Grace, Ethan was drafting his own battle plans. Buoyed by Charlotte's insistence, he demanded a swift divorce settlement. Charlotte wanted him to push for custody of the unborn child, a move designed to tarnish Grace's reputation and bring her to the bargaining table. Ethan's attorney, a high-powered litigator named Caroline Adler, approached the case with relentless aggression. However, Caroline privately warned Ethan that his public affair could jeopardize his standing in a custody dispute. It was a complication Ethan chose to downplay. He believed his wealth, influence, and carefully curated philanthropic record would overshadow any marital missteps. One fateful evening, Grace decided to confront Ethan face to face. Arranging a meeting at Lancaster Capital's Midtown office, she walked in with Jenna by her side. The polished marble floors and modern artwork contrasted starkly with the tension bristling in the air. When they reached Ethan's office, they found him seated behind an imposing mahogany desk, Charlotte perched on a chair beside him, arms folded confidently. "What's this?" Ethan asked, gesturing toward the files Grace carried. "These," Grace began, her voice calm but resolute, "are documents indicating that my father included a clause safeguarding the Shepherd family's investments in Lancaster Capital, triggered by moral and ethical breaches of trust." Charlotte scoffed. "What does that even mean?" Grace ignored Charlotte and fixed her gaze on Ethan. "It means that if you continued to violate our marriage vows publicly and undermine the integrity of our partnership, you forfeit any claim to the Shepherd funds. Plus, you're liable for returning all profits generated from those funds. Now, that's what that means." Silence gripped the room. Ethan's face darkened, a vein throbbing at his temple. Charlotte visibly tensed, her eyes darting between Grace and Ethan. "That's absurd." "You have no proof," Charlotte snapped. With measured deliberation, Grace pulled out printed copies of news articles featuring Ethan's affair, along with photographic evidence and social media commentary. "No proof?" she echoed, arching an eyebrow. Ethan made sure there was proof every time he flaunted you around town. Ethan stood abruptly, palms pressing into the table. That clause will never hold up in court, he snarled. This was a business arrangement between two consenting parties. You can't just yank funding out of my company because you're hurt. Grace swallowed hard, her anger tempered by a quiet determination. I'm not trying to hurt you, Ethan. I'm protecting what's rightfully mine and our child's. You made this choice, not me. Jenna, sensing the hostility brimming, interjected. Let's keep this civilized. Obviously, we're here to propose an arrangement, one that secures Grace's finances and child support. Or we can let the courts handle it. And trust me, the tabloids will love that story. For a moment, Ethan seemed caught between fury and desperation. The affair had boosted his ego but threatened to sabotage his empire. Charlotte, visibly perturbed, muttered, "We don't have to take this. Your attorneys will crush her in court. Let's go, Ethan." But Ethan remained still, his face pale. He realized the precariousness of his position. The entire foundation of Lancaster Capital, much of it financed by Shepherd Pharmaceuticals, was at stake. The idea of losing that wealth, that power, churned his stomach more than the notion of losing Grace. He cleared his throat. "Give me time to consider," he murmured, avoiding Grace's eyes. "I'll talk to Caroline, see how we can settle this." Grace nodded, stepping back. "We'll be in touch." She and Jenna pivoted, leaving the office with a wave of finality. As the elevator doors closed behind them, Grace exhaled a breath she hadn't realized she'd been holding. Though the battle was far from over, she had just seized the upper hand. Soon after the confrontation, Ethan realized the scope of the threat. Charlotte, now feeling the heat, pressed him for assurances. "You won't actually lose Lancaster Capital, right?" she asked, her once confident tone laced with concern. He tried to reassure her. "I have ways to maneuver. This is just a scare tactic, I promise." But in private, Ethan began reviewing his finances with a team of accountants, searching for ways to disentangle Shepherd Pharmaceuticals' investment from Lancaster Capital. If he failed, his entire empire might crumble, leaving him at the mercy of Grace's demands and, more importantly, at the mercy of public disgrace, something his pride could not bear. All the while, Grace quietly prepared for her child's birth. She moved back to her family estate in Boston for a time, wanting distance from the media swarm in New York. She refused to issue any public statements, preferring to let the rumor mill churn. Headlines like "The Fall of Lancaster Capital" and "High Society Showdown, Grace Lancaster Strikes Back" splashed across tabloids. Yet behind closed doors, Grace was simply a woman determined to build a secure future for her unborn baby, channeling the spirit of Ronald Shepherd, whose protective instincts lived on in legal documents bearing his signature. As the legal skirmishes escalated, Ethan found himself increasingly cornered. Attempts to sidestep Ronald Shepherd's claws were met with resistance from James Whitmore and his legal team. Suddenly, his once stalwart investors showed signs of doubt, concerned about the negative publicity swirling around Lancaster Capital. Deals stalled, partnerships wavered, and whispers circulated that Ethan's leadership might be compromised by personal scandal. Under enormous pressure, Ethan retreated with Charlotte to the luxurious penthouse he'd purchased for her. Instead of quiet evenings of romance, their time was now consumed by tense phone calls with attorneys and arguments about how to handle Grace's demands. Charlotte chafed at the notion that Ethan might cede large sums of money, not to mention a controlling stake in the company, just to appease his soon-to-be ex-wife. "It's not just about ceding money," Ethan growled one evening, pacing across the marble floor. "The courts could freeze assets if they suspect fraud or breach of contract. We could lose everything, Charlotte, and that means both of us." She tensed, crossing her arms. "So what are you planning to do? Beg Grace for mercy?" You think she'll be forgiving after how we humiliated her? He stopped, eyes flickering with a desperate glint. No, I'm going to fight. But I need leverage, something that forces Grace to negotiate. An idea sprang to Charlotte's mind. She's pregnant, Ethan. There's your leverage custody of the child. If you threaten to battle for custody, she might give in to protect her baby from public scrutiny. Ethan hesitated. Threatening custody felt like crossing a moral line, but the situation had grown dire. He was losing his financial empire, bit by bit. Standing in the way of that downfall was a single woman, his wife, whom he had scorned publicly. She'll never believe a judge would give me custody over her, Ethan mused. She's stable, philanthropic, has no criminal record. It's a stretch. Charlotte wasn't dissuaded. People have lost custody battles for less, especially if your legal team can paint her as emotionally unstable, or if you argue that you can provide a more secure environment. Money talks, Ethan, and if you get your hands on a good psychologist willing to testify in your favor, you might stand a chance. He ran a hand through his hair, torn between revulsion and desperation. Using his own unborn child as a bargaining chip felt unspeakably vile, but the alternative, losing Lancaster Capital, his life's work, seemed unthinkable. He took a deep breath, deciding that any hesitation had to be quashed. "I'll do what I have to do," he muttered, sounding more like someone convincing himself than Charlotte. That very week, Ethan's attorney, Caroline Adler, scheduled an emergency meeting with James Whitmore to deliver the ultimatum. Grace should relinquish her claim to the Shepherd funds, or Ethan would seek full custody of their unborn child. Citing concerns about Grace's mental health and her capacity to handle the responsibilities of parenthood given her father's recent death and mounting stress. It was a draconian move, but it could serve as the bargaining chip Ethan desperately needed. When James relayed this threat to Grace, she was at her family's estate, resting in anticipation of her second trimester checkup. Jenna was by her side, and they listened in horror as James walked them through the legal ramifications of Ethan's plan. Grace felt tears burn the edges of her eyes. "He's threatening to take my baby," she whispered, hands protectively over her belly. For a moment, she was paralyzed by fear, flashes of courtroom battles swirling in her mind. Jenna squeezed her hand. "Don't let him bully you. He's just desperate." James nodded firmly. He has almost no chance of winning custody, but the stress of such a battle could take a toll on you and the child. It's a classic scare tactic. Grace inhaled, forcing herself to remain composed. She could almost hear her father's voice whispering, "Stay strong, find a solution." Instead of crumbling, she summoned a fierce resolve. "You tell Ethan Lancaster," she declared, eyes blazing, "that if he wants to wage war, I won't flinch. And if he dares to drag my pregnancy through the mud, he'll see just how far I'm willing to go to protect my child and my father's legacy." James offered a slight smile of admiration. "I'll let Caroline know, and we'll prepare a counter-offensive to ensure he can't use custody as blackmail." But Grace had another idea, one more potent than any legal maneuver. She recalled the philanthropic networks her father had cultivated, people with significant influence in business, politics, and society at large. Ronald Shepherd had once confided in her that these networks could be used to sway public opinion or quell a corporate scandal if leveraged correctly. Later that night, Grace made a series of phone calls. One went to Linda Martin, a renowned investigative journalist at the Boston Chronicle, who had always been sympathetic to the Shepherd family's philanthropic endeavors. Another call went to Senator Richard Coleman, a longtime ally of the Shepherds, whose re-election campaign Ronald had supported. And so on. By the time she was done, Grace had laid the groundwork for a public narrative that could depict Ethan Lancaster as a morally bankrupt individual, willing to use an unborn child for financial gain. Word spread quickly, and the next day an op-ed appeared in the Boston Chronicle, Betrayal and Bravado, the making of a high-stakes divorce. Though it didn't mention Ethan by name, the piece clearly pointed to him as a prominent financier using ruthless tactics against a pregnant spouse. The public, already disgusted by the earlier spectacle, quickly took sides, and most sided with Grace, the philanthropic heiress, with an unborn child at stake. Sensing public sentiment shift, Ethan grew more agitated. Charlotte, seeing the potential unraveling of their lavish lifestyle, demanded he take control of the narrative. But every time Ethan tried to mount a defense, it backfired. Tabloids replayed videos of him and Charlotte at exclusive parties, fueling the perception of him as callous and self-absorbed. In a last-ditch effort, Ethan reached out to Grace directly. Late one evening, her phone buzzed, his name illuminated on the screen. She answered, breath catching in her throat. He spoke, voice subdued, carrying a hint of the man she once knew. "Grace, this has gotten out of hand." She paused, absorbing his words. Memories of their happier times flooded her thoughts. "It didn't have to, Ethan," she said softly. "You made it this way." There was silence on the other end before he sighed. "I'm willing to negotiate privately. No attorneys, no press, just you and me." Grace thought of her father's documents, of her unborn child, and the vow she made to protect them both. "Fine," she finally agreed. "I'll meet you. But understand this, Ethan. If I even sense that you're playing me again, I won't hold back. I will bring you and Lancaster Capital down, clause or no clause." "Understood," he murmured, almost sounding contrite. "We'll meet at the old lake house in Greenwich. Noon tomorrow." As Grace hung up the phone, she felt her heart quake. For a fleeting moment, she recalled the man who had once won her heart at a charity gala, who had held her hand so tenderly at their wedding. But she couldn't allow nostalgia to overshadow the grim reality. This meeting would likely be their last shot at a peaceful resolution. And if it failed, she was ready to unleash every last weapon in her arsenal. The next day dawned grey and cold, as though the weather itself anticipated the looming confrontation. Grace made the journey from Boston to Greenwich under a cloak of tension. She tried to calm her churning stomach by resting a hand on her baby bump, reminding herself that she was doing all of this to secure their future. The lake house in Greenwich had once been a weekend retreat for Ethan and Grace, a place of candle-lit dinners and whispered confessions under the stars. But as Grace pulled up the winding driveway, the property felt foreign. A silent witness to love turned rancid. She found Ethan waiting inside, standing by the large bay windows that overlooked the still waters. His posture was rigid, his face drawn. It struck her how tired he looked, with dark circles under his eyes, hinting at sleepless nights. Gone was the brimming confidence that once defined him. He gestured for her to sit on a sofa near the fireplace, its embers glowing faintly. She obliged, settling into a seat where, years ago, they had once cuddled on lazy Sunday afternoons. He remained standing, arms crossed, as if needing the advantage of elevation for the conversation to come. "Thanks for meeting me," he began, voice subdued. "I hope we can resolve this without more public spectacle." Grace glanced around at the familiar surroundings before locking eyes with him. "And whose fault is that spectacle, Ethan?" she asked softly, though her tone carried a razor's edge. He held her gaze, jaw clenching. "I'm not blameless. I know that. But you're not making it easy either. Going public with the affair, trying to tear down my company." "Your company?" she echoed, arching an eyebrow. "It's partly my father's company, through the investments that gave you your start. Let's not forget that." He shifted uncomfortably, as if acknowledging an unspoken truth he couldn't openly concede. Clearing his throat, he approached a small table, rifling through a stack of papers. "I called you here because I want to propose an agreement," he said, handing her a folder. "We'll settle this out of court." Grace opened it, scanning the typed lines. Ethan offered her a substantial financial settlement, a lump sum payment, continued support for the child, and property in Boston. However, there was a stipulation that she relinquish all claims to Lancaster Capital and any potential enforcement of Ronald Shepard's clause. In other words, she could walk away with a tidy sum, but would forfeit any future stake in the company. Grace's eyes flickered with indignation. "You expect me to sign away the clause? And what happens if your legal team fights me for custody later?" Ethan shook his head. "No. If you sign this, I'll waive custody claims and guarantee child support. We'll have shared custody down the line if you're comfortable with it, but I'll never challenge you in court." His voice wavered just enough to betray his desperation. "Grace, let's face it, you're going to be fine financially. You don't need to destroy my company. That's not going to bring back what we lost." She studied him, recalling the heated moments that led them to this impasse. Perhaps he genuinely believed he was offering a fair deal. She flipped another page and found a figure that, to anyone else, might seem astronomical. But Grace recognized something crucial. Accepting this settlement meant relinquishing the moral vindication and the rightful claim her father had safeguarded. She also knew that Ronald would have wanted her to protect their legacy, not just for money, but for the principles of integrity. She closed the folder softly. "You don't get it, Ethan. This isn't just about me. It's about preserving my father's intentions. He trusted you, believed you were worthy of supporting. You broke that trust publicly, shamelessly. If I sign this, I'm letting you off the hook for everything." He exhaled, his frustration boiling. "And what good does humiliating me in court do, Grace? We once loved each other. We built a life together. Doesn't that mean anything?" Her eyes misted, but she kept her resolve. "It meant everything until you threw it away. I'm not the one who paraded around with a mistress, tried to blackmail me with custody threats, and then tried to buy me off." He looked genuinely pained, shoulders sagging as if an invisible weight pressed down on him. "I was stupid," he whispered, casting his gaze out the window. "I was scared of losing everything I built. You know how I grew up struggling, overshadowed by wealth I never had. For a moment I tasted power, and it consumed me." For a fleeting instant, Grace remembered the Ethan she first met, a driven, scrappy entrepreneur with big dreams and a gentle heart. But she also saw how greed and vanity had corrupted him, turning him into a man she barely recognized. She rose from the sofa, folder still in hand. "I'll consider your offer, but don't expect me to yield just because we shared a past." He nodded, a flicker of defeat in his eyes. "I understand." For a moment, they stood in silence, each absorbing the reality that their love story had turned into this tragic standoff. Grace turned to leave, stopping at the door. "I genuinely hope you find a way to live with yourself after all this, Ethan. Our child will know about their father one day. I wonder what you'll want that story to be." His only response was a slight nod, as though the question itself weighed more than anything he could utter. As Grace left, she felt a swirling mix of pity, anger, and a tinge of sorrow for what might have been. Driving away, she flipped through the settlement documents again. The sums were dizzying, the property listings more than sufficient for a luxurious life, but something in her heart wouldn't let her sign away the Shepherd clause. Something told her that letting Ethan walk away with Lancaster Capital and all the illusions of power he had woven would set the worst precedent possible. By the time she returned to Boston, her decision was made. She would fight, not out of spite, but out of a sense of responsibility to her unborn child, to her father's memory, and perhaps even to the Ethan she once loved. If he was truly repentant, He'd face the consequences of his actions and rebuild himself from the ground up, free from illusions. Little did she know, her choice would set in motion a chain of events so explosive it would captivate the nation and leave an indelible mark on high society. The final blow was yet to be delivered, and it would prove to be far more devastating than any settlement, financial or otherwise, could have predicted. Chapter 8 shorter version. By the time the divorce trial began, the public was riveted. Reporters crowded New York Supreme Court as Lancaster v. Lancaster turned into a spectacle. Grace arrived 6 months pregnant, resolute and calm. Ethan strode in flanked by Charlotte and a high-powered legal team. Over several tense days, both sides presented evidence. James Whitmore underscored Ronald Shepard's protective clause, revealing how Ethan's affair and public flaunting broke the trust that anchored their partnership. Ethan's lawyer tried dismissing moral violations as irrelevant to corporate deals, but witnesses painted a damning portrait of a man corrupted by ambition. When closing arguments ended, Judge Goldstein ruled decisively. The clause stood. Ethan was ordered to repay all Shepard investments, plus profits. Effectively, Lancaster Capital faced collapse. Onlookers gasped at the staggering financial blow. Grace, holding her ground, walked out with her dignity intact and her future secure. In a final twist, investors fled and the company's value plummeted. Charlotte soon left Ethan, chasing the lifestyle she once assumed he'd always provide. Grace quietly returned to Boston, preparing for the birth of her daughter, Aurora. Though rumors swirled, she gave no further public statements, focusing instead on raising her child. In the end, Ethan Lancaster's arrogance led to his downfall. He lost nearly everything when forced to honor a promise he never truly respected. Meanwhile, Grace upheld her father's legacy, proving that even the wealthiest empire can crumble under the weight of betrayal, and that integrity, once defended, shines brighter than all the riches in the world. And there you have it, a story of opulent beginnings, scandalous betrayals, and the unbreakable resolve of a woman determined to protect her child and honor her father's legacy. Ethan Lancaster paraded his mistress, banking on arrogance and influence to shelter him from consequences. But in the climactic showdown, Grace's righteous stand and the power of a hidden clause brought him to his knees. It's a testament to how greed and deceit can shatter even the most dazzling empires, and how truth, once ignited, refuses to be extinguished. If you found yourself captivated by this saga of lavish wealth and ultimate downfall, please don't forget to like this video, share it with friends who love a good drama, and subscribe to this channel for more riveting stories. Your support fuels our passion for storytelling, and we can't wait to bring you the next gripping tale. Stay tuned.